Judge Amelia Brooks had built her reputation on clarity, compassion, and an unshakable integrity that earned her rapid promotions through the county bench. By age 40, she presided over high-profile civil rights cases in Clearwater, Florida. Her crisp black robes and steady voice, a beacon of fairness in a system too often skewed by power and politics. Colleagues praised her legal acumen. Community leaders lauded her landmark rulings, protecting marginalized plaintiffs. Aspiring attorneys sought clerkships just to watch her work. Everything pointed toward her elevation to the Fifth District Court of Appeal. Until the morning the bar's ethics committee arrived at her door. It was a routine Wednesday when two dour investigators handed her a letter stamped, "Notice of Formal Inquiry." The charge, an ethics slip, for failing to report a $50 gift certificate she had received as a conference door prize at a legal symposium 6 months earlier. Amelia stared at the pages, disbelief and fury warring in her chest. She had meticulously disclosed every honorarium, every speaking fee, every campaign donation. Yet this tiny oversight, buried in a stack of invoices, now threatened not only her promotion but her very membership on the bench. Word leaked almost instantly. By midday, the press had spun the story into headlines: judicial favorite tangled in ethics scandal, champion of justice faces inquiry, can we trust the Gavel? Local news vans clustered outside her home. Reporters' microphones descended on her assistant as she fumbled reassurance. Inside the courthouse, whispers followed her past colleagues' benches. She must have something to hide. How could a judge be so careless? Even her most ardent supporters, community activists and civil rights lawyers, paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. That evening, Amelia sat alone in her chambers, the polished wood desk strewn with ethics statutes, gift disclosure regulations, and the scant evidence against her. Outside, the setting sun painted the courthouse steps in fading gold, but inside, her world had gone dark. As she traced the embossed seal on the inquiry letter, a steely resolve took shape. She would prove this accusation unfounded, and in doing so, expose the bureaucratic machinery ready to crush any judge who dared challenge the status quo. This ethics slip would become the spark that ignited a broader revolt against the system's rigid formalism, and lead her back, stronger than ever, to the judge's bench. The very next morning, after the inquiry letter landed like a thunderclap on her desk, Judge Brooks awoke to silence. Her usual 6 a.m. bench conference was canceled. Her courtroom door still bore her nameplate, but the gavels rested unused. By midday, the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission had issued a temporary suspension. Her robe hung in her office closet, untouched and heavy. Amelia's world narrowed to the 4 walls of her chambers. Reporters staked out the courthouse entrance. Colleagues scurried past without meeting her eye. Her longtime judicial assistant, Martin Reyes, hovered at the threshold each hour, eyes full of sympathy, but lips sealed by protocol. In the law library down the hall, stacks of ethics opinions and gift reporting regulations lined her desk, their fine print mocking her. All gifts or honoraria exceeding $50 must be disclosed within 30 days. The prize certificate, just $50 worth of book vouchers, had slipped through her usual fastidious review. Yet here it was, wielded like an axe. Late that afternoon, Amelia pored over her records, calendars, expense reports, conference agendas. She traced the certificate's journey from conference host to her inbox, noting Martin's initial email. "Nice to see you won the raffle. Enjoy." She found her handwritten note, "Thank you. Will review form." But in the chaos of back-to-back hearings, the form had never been filed. As she sat there, exhaustion and shame coiled in her gut. A single clerical lapse, an ethics slip, had summoned doubts about her entire career. Her phone buzzed with texts from mentors and former clerks. Cautious words of encouragement, veiled warnings to weather the storm. The Judicial Bar Association's president had left a voicemail. "We stand by your record, M. But the process must run its course." Even her closest friend on the bench, Justice Hernandez, offered a terse embrace in the hallway, followed by a whispered, "Be careful. They're watching." As night fell, Amelia retreated to her home study. Family photos lined the mantel, her parents' proud faces at her investiture, snapshots of her and her daughter after school. She stared at them, heart heavy with the knowledge that her mistake had cast a shadow, not only on herself, but on every trust-seeking litigant who ever appeared before her. Yet, in the crucible of isolation, a spark of defiance flickered. She recalled the many times she'd ruled against entrenched power, defended the voiceless, upheld rights others deemed too costly. How could she now stand silent before an overly rigid bureaucracy that cared more for form than substance? Swallowing her pride, Amelia reached for her phone and tapped out a message to Mark Rivers, her former clerk turned civil rights attorney. "I need your help. This goes deeper than me." As she hit send, the walls of doubt ceded ground to determination. She would not beg for mercy. Instead, she would expose the absurdity of a system that punished a $50 oversight more harshly than the injustices she'd spent her life correcting. In that moment of solitude, Judge Amelia Brooks resolved to transform her forced exile into the first step of a revolt, for herself and for every citizen silenced by procedural tyranny. By the end of the first week of her suspension, Judge Brooks's chambers had become a fortress of legal briefs, news clippings, and sticky notes, mapping connections between procedural rule books and real-world harms. Yet, it was a single email that truly ignited her fight. It arrived late one evening from Mark Rivers, her former clerk, and now a prominent civil rights attorney. "Amelia, there's more to this than a $50 certificate. I've uncovered dozens of similar ethics referrals used to delay or remove judges who issued unpopular rulings. We need to hit back publicly." Within 24 hours, they launched an online petition titled "Justice Over Formality, Reinstate Judge Brooks." In the petition's text, Amelia recounted her career's milestones, landmark decisions protecting voting rights, injunctions against biased policing, and pro bono weeks teaching legal clinics in underserved communities, and contrasted them with the trivial bureaucratic snafu now weaponized against her. Mark circulated the petition through legal networks and civil rights groups. Former clerks shared it on social media. By the second day, the petition had 10,000 signatures, and counting. Journalists began calling. Local TV sent a camera crew to film Amelia's empty courtroom, the echo of her once commanding gavel conspicuous in the silence. A regional newspaper ran a front-page expose on the ethics system's kill-by-paperwork tactics. Meanwhile, student activists at Clearwater Law School staged a black-robe protest on campus, donning graduation gowns and carrying placards, "Form over fairness," and $50 or 50 years, equal justice, as they marched to City Hall. Their chants of "Restore her robe" echoed off the marble pillars. Back in her kitchen, her late husband's brown wood table now strewn with laptops and petition printouts, Amelia held a strategy call with Mark and Pastor Nguyen, a local community organizer whose voter education efforts had once drawn her into civic work. They discussed forming a broader coalition: public defenders disillusioned by procedural roadblocks, ex-offenders denied relief by overly technical appeals rules, and nonprofit lawyers who'd seen justice thwarted by formality. Pastor Nguyen, who regularly led a faith-based justice ministry, secured space in his church for a Justice Town Hall. Word spread through flyers and social media groups. Thursday, 7 p.m., Judge Brooks and friends, justice beyond paperwork. Amelia rehearsed her remarks, determined to shift the narrative from personal scandal to systemic reform. On Thursday night, over 200 people, students, lawyers, faith leaders, and everyday citizens, filled the church's fellowship hall. Under the stained glass windows, Amelia stood at the podium between Mark and Pastor Nguyen. The room settled as she spoke. "Thank you for standing with me. This is not about my gavel. It's about the thousands whose rights hinge on more than cut-and-dried rules. When we prioritize boxes checked over harms prevented, justice itself is the casualty. Tonight, we demand an ethics process that acknowledges intent and impact, not one that weaponizes trivialities to silence courageous judges." The audience erupted into applause. Mark then outlined their legislative proposal, amending the Judicial Qualifications Act to include a materiality threshold. Gifts under $100 or unintentional omissions with no corrupt purpose would be deemed non-actionable. Finally, Pastor Nguyen led the crowd in a vow to deliver 50,000 signatures in person to the State Ethics Commission and to lobby each state senator and representative to support the reform. As the meeting adjourned, volunteers clustered in corners, signing up for phone banks, drafting op-eds, and planning a justice march on the Capitol steps. Amelia lingered by the exit, shaken by the outpouring of solidarity. A young public defender touched her arm. "Your rulings saved my client's life. Now, we'll save your career." That night, as Amelia returned to her quiet house, she felt the weight of isolation lift, replaced by a surging current of collective purpose. The spark of resistance had ignited a movement, one that would not rest until the gavel returned to her hand and until no judge or citizen again fell victim to bureaucratic formalism. On a brisk autumn morning, Judge Amelia Brooks arrived at the Florida State Supreme Court building, its white columns and towering pediment gleaming in the golden light. She wore her restored judicial robes, a silent testament to her promise of vindication, and carried a slender binder of briefs, exhibits, and amici curiae letters. Outside, dozens of supporters, law students in black robes, civil rights attorneys, even veterans bearing "Justice over Formality" signs, lined the granite steps, cheering as she passed through the ornate doors. Inside the hushed courtroom, the 7 justices took their seats behind the curved mahogany bench. Chief Justice Morales, known for her meticulous questioning, presided in the center. To her right sat Justice Patel, a former prosecutor whose deference to technical rules was legendary. To her left, Justice Delgado, famed for her progressive rulings on equal protection claims. On the floor, opposing counsel from the Judicial Qualifications Commission, 2 sharp-suited lawyers briefly reviewed their notes, preparing to defend the Commission's rigid interpretation of the gift reporting statutes. When the clerk called Brooks v. Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission, number 2024, FG 1121, Amelia stepped forward. Her opening words echoed in the vaulted chamber. "May it please the court, this case is not about a $50 certificate. It is about the Constitution's promise that justice shall not be sacrificed on the altar of formality." The Commission's punitive response to an inadvertent omission undermines both judicial independence and public confidence in our courts. She began by tracing the certificate's provenance: an unmarked raffle ticket drawn by conference staff, a spontaneous door prize announcement, and a thank you email noting the book voucher, none of which she sought or solicited. Then she pivoted to the broader implications: how an ethics code devoid of materiality forces judges to choose between zealous service and fear of bureaucratic reprisal. Chief Justice Morales leaned in. "Judge Brooks, the Commission argues that uniform enforcement of reporting requirements, regardless of amount, preserves transparency. Do you concede any need for bright-line rules?" Amelia nodded respectfully. "Transparent rules matter, but only when they serve justice. A rule that crushes honest actors over negligible sums chills initiative and invites calculated referrals to silence courageous rulings. We urge the court to adopt a substantiality standard, where disclosures under $100, absent corrupt intent, are presumptively non-actionable." Justice Patel's gaze sharpened. "But who decides what is substantial? Wouldn't that invite more litigation over thresholds?" Amelia countered with precision. "The legislature has already set similar benchmarks in campaign finance and tax law. A clear statutory floor, 100 indexed to inflation, strikes the balance between preventing abuse and avoiding draconian oversight." She then presented testimony from expert amici curiae, former Ethics Commission chairs, and constitutional scholars explaining how materiality tests preserve both accountability and common sense. As argument concluded, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filed their notebooks, supporters exhaled in relief. Over the next 2 weeks, the justices deliberated in private. When the opinion was released, The headline read, Brooks v. FJQC, Supreme Court limits ethics sanctions to material breaches. The court reversed her suspension, ordered immediate reinstatement, and remanded to the legislature to amend the code. Judge Brooks returned to her chambers to find the hallway lined with applause. Law clerks cheered, colleagues embraced her, and Martin Reyes presented a fresh gavel, emblazoned with the state seal. In that moment, she understood that the battle had transcended her alone. The court's decision vindicated not just one judge's reputation, but the principle that justice must weigh intent and impact above mere procedural perfection. In the weeks following the Supreme Court's decision, while the legislature moved to codify the new $100 materiality threshold, Amelia Brooks and her allies transformed momentum into action. On a crisp Saturday morning, dozens of civil rights attorneys, law students, clergy, and ordinary citizens gathered at Clearwater's City Park under a banner reading, Justice Over Formality, March to Tallahassee. Amelia, now back on the bench, joined them in plain clothes to show solidarity, stepping confidently to the portable podium. Today, she announced, voice echoing across the green lawn, we march not for a personal victory, but for every Floridian whose rights have been delayed, denied, or discarded by procedural obsession. This is our call to lawmakers. Pass the Brooks Bill to enshrine common sense ethics in our statutes. The crowd surged forward, flagging down 4 chartered buses bound for the state capitol. Inside, volunteer organizers distributed packets, letter templates, legislative directories, and schedules for meetings with each district's representative. On the buses, students drafted impromptu speeches, veterans recorded video testimonials about fellow litigants strangled by hyper-technical appeals, and community leaders rehearsed questions to pose at the legislative hearing. That afternoon in Tallahassee, the marchers, numbering over 500, streamed down Monroe Street toward the Capitol steps. Uniformed law clerks linked arms with protesters carrying placards. Intent matters, protect judicial independence, and end ethics by checklist. As they approached the grand staircase, a choir of gospel singers broke into We Shall Overcome, their harmonies amplified by megaphones. Inside the Capitol Rotunda, Amelia led a delegation into the Senate Ethics Committee hearing room. One by one, they presented testimony. A single mother whose eviction appeal stalled for a procedural filing error, a veteran whose PTSD treatment access was delayed by overzealous form checkers, and a retired judge whose landmark decision was quietly overturned after a vindictive referral. Their voices, steady and impassioned, filled the chamber, compelling even the sternest legislators to sit up and listen. When the final witness, a 22-year-old law student, urged the senators to choose justice over hypocrisy, the hearing room burst into applause. Several committee members, visibly moved, announced their intention to co-sponsor the Brooks Bill. Cameras whirred as Amelia, flanked by Mark Rivers and Pastor Nguyen, spoke to reporters. Today, we proved that public will can triumph over red tape. Now, it's time for our leaders to put pen to paper and make these reforms the law of the land. As the sun set over the Capitol dome, the marchers filed back onto their buses with a sense of hard-won purpose. Grassroots energy had carried them hundreds of miles, and now, with confirmation hearings scheduled and bipartisan support emerging, the Brooks Bill's passage seemed imminent. In that surge of civic engagement, Amelia saw the true legacy of her trial by ethics slip. A coalition determined that no judge or citizen would again be sidelined by the tyranny of trivial technicalities. With the Brooks Bill signed into law by Governor Castillo on a warm spring afternoon, Judge Amelia Brooks returned to her official courtroom, robes crisply pressed, gavel gleaming on the bench, on a day that felt more like a coronation than a workday. The new statute's language, enshrining a materiality threshold for gift disclosures under $100, was framed and mounted on the wall behind her bench, a silent testament to the movement she had spearheaded. Implementing the new ethics standard. That morning, Chief Justice Morales convened all Florida judges for a statewide video conference. Amelia addressed her colleagues directly. Today, we shift from a culture of fear, where every small oversight risked career-ending sanctions, to a culture of common sense, where honest mistakes and de minimis gifts no longer overshadow our duty to deliver justice. Let us embrace ethics as a living principle, guided by intent and impact. The conference rolled out training modules on the revised code, interactive scenarios, clear decision trees for disclosures, and an FAQ compiled from the thousands of public comments submitted during the Brooks Bill debate. Judges across the state logged into the portal, acknowledging their understanding and committing to the new spirit of the law. Judicial leadership and mentorship. Back in Clearwater, Amelia launched the Judges for Justice initiative, a mentorship program pairing veteran jurists with newer colleagues to foster ethical judgment beyond black-letter rules. Monthly workshops convened in her chambers, focusing on case studies where rigid procedure had clashed with fairness. At her first session, a panel of trial judges, public defenders, and ethics commission members debated hypothetical dilemmas, from inadvertent receipt of small gifts to borderline campaign contributions. Amelia moderated with the calm authority that had defined her career. When one young judge fretted over a $75 legal treatise sent by a grateful bar association, Amelia smiled and said, "Ask yourself, did this gift influence your decision, or was it simply a token of appreciation? If the latter, embrace transparency, disclose it, and move on to focus on the real work before you." Extending the movement nationwide word of Florida's reform spread quickly. Within months, judicial councils in 3 neighboring states convened study commissions to consider similar materiality thresholds. Mark Rivers and Pastor Nguyen were invited to testify at conferences in Georgia and Alabama, sharing the Clearwater blueprint for balancing integrity with pragmatism. National legal journals praised the Brooks Standard as a landmark in judicial ethics. Amelia herself accepted an invitation to speak at the American Bar Association's annual meeting. Standing before a packed auditorium of judges and attorneys, she recounted her journey, from the initial ethics inquiry to the grassroots coalition that forced systemic change. "We proved that a single misstep need not define a judge or a justice system. By insisting that ethics regulations serve rather than strangle our mission, we honored both the letter and the spirit of the law." A legacy cemented. On the first anniversary of the Brooks Bill's enactment, the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission reported a 70% drop in punitive referrals for de minimis disclosures. Administrative hearings shifted focus from trivial oversights to truly material misconduct. In Clearwater, the local bar association unveiled the Brooks Award for Ethical Excellence, given annually to a jurist or attorney who exemplified integrity tempered with common sense. That evening, Amelia walked through the courthouse halls lined with portraits of past judges. She paused beneath her own portrait, installed after her restoration to the bench, which now bore a small plaque. Amelia Brooks, author of Justice Over Formality, 2024. She touched the frame and smiled, recalling her first days of isolation and doubt. The gavel she wielded was more than a symbol of authority. It was proof that meaningful reform could rise from the ashes of bureaucratic rigidity. As she returned to her chambers to prepare for the next day's docket, civil rights appeals, juvenile justice reviews, and community forum judgments, she carried with her the knowledge that the system she served was stronger, fairer, and more humane than the one she had once faced. And in that realization lay the true measure of her legacy. A justice system that balanced rules with reason, ensuring that the next time a judge faced an ethics slip, substance would always prevail over formality. When the Florida legislature's next judicial appointment cycle opened, Amelia Brooks received word that Governor Castillo intended to nominate her to the 5th District Court of Appeal, fulfilling the trajectory interrupted by that fateful ethics slip. On a warm summer morning, she returned to the Clearwater Courthouse one last time as a trial judge. The lobby buzzed with well-wishers, Clerks, public defenders, and community activists who had marched alongside her, each bearing bouquets of white magnolias, Florida's emblem of dignity and perseverance. A ceremony of restoration. In courtroom 2B, the familiar oak bench gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Chief Justice Morales and three fellow trial judges stood behind the dais as Amelia entered in her freshly pressed robes. The clerk held aloft her commission and, with steady hands, swore her in. "Do you solemnly swear to administer justice without prejudice, to uphold the Constitution and laws of this state, and to honor both the spirit and the letter of ethics that guide our profession?" Amelia's voice rang clear. "I do," and the bench erupted in respectful applause. As she mounted the steps, the crowd rose in ovation, some wiping tears, others offering firm handshakes and embraces. The gavel was passed to her by Chief Justice Morales, its handle worn but its face polished bright. When Amelia rapped it once, the soft echo signaled not an end, but the opening of a new chapter. A vision for appellate justice. Her first day on the 5th District Bench began with a conference among all 5 appellate judges. Amelia listened as cases of constitutional import, voting rights challenges, school discipline disputes, and emerging privacy claims lined the docket. When deliberations commenced, she brought to the table not just legal analysis, but the hard-won principle that procedure must serve fairness. In one early opinion she authored, Judge Brooks cited the new materiality standard to reverse a lower court's denial of relief over a minor filing defect, applying her reform where it mattered most. Mentoring. Across the bench beyond casework, Amelia initiated a mentorship circle within the appellate court. Twice a month, she invited new law clerks and junior judges into her chambers to discuss not only intricate points of appellate procedure, but also the ethical judgment that balances form with substance. During one session, a recent appointee confessed fear of making small mistakes. Amelia shared her own story, reminding them that courage under fire means acknowledging humanity in every rule. Extending justice through education. Amelia's commitment to systemic change reached into academia. She accepted a visiting professorship at Clearwater Law School, teaching a seminar titled Ethics Beyond the Black Letter. In the packed lecture hall, she guided students through case studies where rigid formalism once derailed justice, then showed how her reforms had realigned procedure with principle. Graduating students carried her insights onto clerkships, judicial internships, and law firm pro bono projects, a legacy inscribed in stone and statute. On the courthouse's centennial anniversary, the clerk unveiled a new marble plaque in the main hall, in honor of Judge Amelia Brooks, whose steadfast devotion to justice and reform reshaped Florida's ethics landscape, ensuring that every decision weighs humanity alongside law. Visitors paused to read her name, etched among past luminaries. For Amelia, this lasting commemoration signified that her battle against bureaucracy had become part of the institution's heritage. Continuing the fight. Even as an appellate judge, Amelia remained vigilant. She served on the Florida Judicial Qualifications Commission's Advisory Council, reviewing ethics inquiries with the lens of materiality she had championed. On one late-night conference call, she cast the decisive vote to dismiss a referral concerning an unintentional $80 honorarium, emphasizing that discipline belongs to willful misconduct, not honest oversight. The gavel's true meaning. Years after her suspension, Amelia sat at the appellate bench, hammer in hand, ready to issue another opinion. As she raised the gavel, she remembered the empty courtroom of her exile, the protests that echo off campus steps and Capitol rotundas, and the faces of citizens whose lives hinged on more than legal minutiae. Her single rap summoned both the authority of the law and the compassion of reform. In that resonant stroke lay the promise that justice, served with both firmness and empathy, would forever triumph over the tyranny of trivial formalities.